Welcome to a tour of Derry City Cemetery. It's one of the most fascinating places in the city and in the region. And the history of the world is here on the headstones, literally on the headstones. It was opened up in 1853. If you know your history, it's after the Great Hunger, the famine, 1847, but it had nothing at all to do with that. What it had to do with was that the Victorians had become obsessed with their public health and hygiene. And it's very relevant to the day with the virus in 2020 that they thought that the diseases were getting transmitted by smell. They called it miasma, and they thought to themselves people are getting buried at churchyards beside the local church. They had the diseases, the smell spread diseases, and then you've got the children coming to school and you've got the congregation coming, so it was a bad idea to have to bury your people so close to your children, so close to congregations, so close to people. So they decreed, there was an act of parliament that all big major cities, and Derry was establishing itself as a city, should have their own municipal cemetery. Now Derry's answer to it lay in the outskirts of the city, way out here called McLaughlin's Field, way out past the Brandywell Cottage. It was in the middle of nowhere, it was on a hill, and the corporation decided to ask Stuart Murray, who designed the Glasgow necropolis, which was also on a hill, which is a difficult site for a cemetery, and he done a great job over there, and they asked him to come over here. He surveyed the scene, and he says, do not, if he doesn't even get the job, do not block the view that you have here with trees or walls. So this beautiful view we have today, we can thank Stuart Murray. Well, he did design it. He based it on the Glasgow necropolis, which also had taken the best parts of Père Lachaise in Paris. So anyway, the cemetery opened up in 1853, and it was designed to be like a park, because Victorians thought that a cemetery and a park were sort of like the same thing. You might have picnics, you could have days out in it, you could walk around strolling in your finery on it, and it would have beautiful plants and that, and it actually is really beautiful down there. If we want to move along now, we'll have a wee walk through it. One of the first things very noticeable for visitors to the cemetery, especially not from the Irish tradition, is they notice the very ornate graves of the Irish traveller tradition. And some of them have told me that there's a huge superstition within their community that nobody should ever stand in your grave. So it's very ornate and that, and it's very noticeable especially for overseas visitors. So one of the first Irish Republican graves we would encounter would be a man called Johnny White, who was the leader of the IRA in 1969 here in the city, whenever the Battle of Bogside and the Troubles started. As you can see, Irish Republicans will be marked with flagpole, and on significant anniversaries, the flagpole will fly the relevant flags, either for the Irish Republican Socialist Movement, the Starry Plough, or the Irish Tricolour, whatever, depending on what organisation you represented. So the flags don't fly all year round, they just fly on special occasions. This here would be a very, very special part of the cemetery. It's called the Garden of Angels, and it's the wee babies that were stillborn, and there's a huge lot of expense and hearses and that, and the mammy's still in distress in the hospital, so you want the dignity of the burial, the Christian burial for your child, for your baby. And the agreement here, the arrangement is you get a wee shoebox size for your child, and there'll be a wee ceremony, and as you can see, it's a really special place. Every visitor that comes here from overseas, anywhere, all say the same thing, that they're really glad that it was put in a very prime position rather than hid away and stuck in a wee corner. And the wee angels that they are were given pride of place within the cemetery. This has been the grave of Bridget Bond, who many people would regard as being Derry's answer to Rosa Parks, the lady that just refused to get up on the bus in Alabama in the civil rights struggle. As you can see, Bridget here in the 1960s, when a lot of women here in Derry were just doing what the church told them and what their husbands told them, Bridget Bond was out protesting against poor housing, against injustice and that. And as you can see from the dove, the civil rights emblem, that she got the great honour of unveiling the Bloody Sunday Memorial in 1974 down in Roosevelt Street. So a lot of people think she does not get the credit she deserves, and some people say it's because she was a woman, some people say it was because she hadn't got guns and bombs, and people say it was a combination of both. But certainly now a lot of people have come to realise that this woman was a significant to our history as what Rosa Parks was to the American civil rights. So this here would be the highly significant Irish Republican Socialist plot, the other faction of Irish Republicanism, and buried here would be two of the 1981 hunger strikers, Patsy O'Hara and Michael Devine. I'm sure you would all know about the campaign for the prisoners were getting turned to be ordinary criminals, which they resented and rejected, went on hunger strike for political status to say that they were different, they were political prisoners. So people would come from all over the world to visit this, and there would be a wee bit of controversy as well, because people from the Protestant community were saying that they didn't like a statue of a terrorist on the cemetery. So of course they answered back, there's statues of British soldiers all over the city centre, etc, etc. Revolutionaries from all over the world would come and visit this plot. You'll see them every summer. So for any visitors or anybody interested in the conflict, the recent conflict, this would be the section they visit, because this would be the 1970s and 1980s. You see a lot of flagpoles here from the Republican dead, Irish Republicans and that, and a lot of the tragedies that we've witnessed over the years. This here would be the section where the burials would have taken place. This is the grave, final resting place of a young girl called Susan Morgan, and she died in one of the most largest tragedies and saddest tragedies in Irish history, the Stardust Inferno in Disco. Valentine's night, February 1981, went on fire, and 46 young people between the ages of 16 and 26 never came home, and to this day they're still fighting for justice about who started the fire, etc. And the Hillsborough families from Liverpool supporters have been here, and the Bloody Sunday families, all united in the three tragedies of Bloody Sunday, Hillsborough and the Stardust fire disaster in Dublin. So this, until recent times, would have been the most visited section of Derry City Cemetery. It's what's known as the Bloody Sunday plot, and at the time of Bloody Sunday, the massacre, it was believed that it would be hugely symbolic if they could bury the 13 victims in a row. And all I can tell you is from my own personal perspective that Jackie Duddy, the first killed that day, waving the white handkerchief, Bishop Dilly, his mammy had died, my Aunt Maureen, in 1968. She's buried away over here, and the family says, well, it's a nice symbolic thing to bury, but he's going to be buried with his mammy. I'm sure you can all agree with the sentiments and that. And so 5 of the victims, Nash, Patrick Doherty, Gilmore, Michael Kelly, were buried 5 in a row. So a lot of people, foreign people, English people, even people from elsewhere in Ireland would say to me, why haven't they got Oglan Iron? Why haven't they got flagpoles around that? And I have to come out. Do you not know that that's the whole thing, is that they weren't members of any organisation, or they were innocent civilians, and as you can see. So Bloody Sunday was January the 30th, 1972, with the burials over here, and just along the road then, we've got Mcguinness, Derry, murdered by British troops, May 1972, just a 15-year-old boy. And it's only in recent times now that the British Ministry of Defence have actually said that Mcguinness Derry was a totally innocent young lad, and he wasn't acting suspicious, and he wasn't in that, which gives the family great comfort. But Mcguinness went to St Joseph's School, lived in the Bogside. I went to St Joseph's School, I ended up teaching it, and also a young boy called Wally Best. Wally Best lived just up here beside the cemetery, and he had joined the British Army. He actually served as a peacekeeper with the Royal Irish Rangers, keeping the conflict and parties in Cyprus apart, the Turk and Greek Cypriots. Came home and leave, all knowing that the IRA officials and provisionals had issued a statement saying that they should kill every British soldier in retaliation for Bloody Sunday, which went against a lot of the families' wishes and the people. So Wally Best actually went to the wake house of Mcguinness Derry and says a prayer for him, not knowing that he'd be abducted later, shot dead by the official IRA as a British soldier, and absolutely was buried then, side by side. Murdered by British troops, serving the British Army, erected by his comrades. I'm always looking for good sides to any story, and a good side, or a positive side, this story was after they killed Wally Best. The mammies and the mothers of Craigan and the Bogside marched on the official IRA headquarters. They were really angry. As far as they were concerned, they had killed Mrs. Best's son, not a soldier. And a few months after, the official IRA declared, maybe due to this as well as other factors, that they were going down the political route and putting the guns away. And so that was product of this tragedy here. So I don't know, I think to me and all the tours I've taken on here and living here all my life, that this here just shows you how complex Irish history and our story is. So the 14th victim of Bloody Sunday was a man called John Johnston, and as far as we're aware, he wasn't even on the march. He was actually crossing William Street to check on an elderly aunt in case she was getting choked with CS gas, and he was shot and he died months later. And there he is, John Johnston, died 16th of June 1972. No ogling irons, no soldier of Ireland, no murdered by anybody, and yet for years this man was getting, his name was tinted for being a sniper, a bomber or whatever. The man was an innocent civilian, and I think it just shows you here where he's buried, that's exactly what he was, just an innocent civilian, John Johnston. So this would be the grave of Martin Mcguinness, very, very well known, needs no introduction, but his final resting place. It's in the Irish Provisional Republican plot, and as you can see, he's got the same headstone as all the other volunteers, member of the organisation. It's actually looked after by a group called the National Graves Association, and as you can see, it's very prominent plot facing the river in the city here. So here you have the statue. Cuchulainn was ancient hound of Ulster, a great warrior, and it's believed, the myth says, that legend says that he never wanted to die on his knees or on the ground, so he tied himself to the tree, and then it was the landing of the crow, or the bird, that symbolised that he was dead. So this here, the centrepiece of the Irish Provisionals section, would have been used for all the major speeches. You know, over the years you had speeches here from Rory O'Brady, Sean McStephen, Gerry Adams, Martin Mcguinness himself and that, and it would have been very significant place, and as you can see it's visited also from all over the world, and it's very revered and honoured place amongst Irish Republicans, the Provisionals. This story surprises a lot of people from the city. They're coming tours, and it's what I call the forgotten Martin Mcguinness, and it's Robert Martin Mcguinness. His nickname is Downey. Was in the Irish Army from the Brandywell, and he was shot at very close range by the British soldiers, and they says he had a gun, which he hadn't got. He sort of got a military funeral here from his comrades in the Irish Army, even though they were in civilian clothes, and they're still fighting for justice for him to this day, because they says he was waving a gun and that. They didn't, and he's got no ogling iron. He wasn't a member of any movement, and his case has sort of been largely forgotten in the city, but they're hoping now to get a new inquest on that. It's just another one of the innocent victims that sort of history have faded into the past, you know. So as we move down the cemetery, we're moving back in history, and here we have graves of the victims of the Peonyburn bombings. A lot of young people think it's something to do with IRA or the conflict, but as you see, it's Easter 1941, and the bombing was actually the German bombing. And the irony is that the only German bomb that dropped and killed people here in the city in World War II dropped in Mazine's Park, housing the World War I veterans that fought the Germans. And there they were, killed in their beds during World War II. You couldn't make it up, the irony of it. And there was 13 people died in that incident. And as you can see, there's another family over here, but it says they died on the 16th of April 1941, while Richmond's here says they died on the 15th of April. And what it was that it happened at night during Easter, and if you were certified dead before 12 o'clock, then the date of death was the 15th, and those that were certified dead when they were pulled from the rubble after 12 o'clock, their date of death will say the 16th of April. So we move back in history, Second World War, Mazine's Park bombing, and here we've got killed by enemy action. The end of January 1945. If you know your history, the Second World War ended in Europe in May 1945. So this was just weeks before the end of the war. And this man Hackett was killed by enemy action, and his friend down here, Mr. Doherty, had been on the dole here in Derry, it seems, and they were told, you've had your national assistance money for so many weeks, and now if we offer you a job, you have to take the job or you get wiped. A lot of people will understand that. So they were offered a job in London, and if they had turned it down, they'd have been wiped. So they took the job. There were two builders, and it seems they were only there 11 days whenever Hitler started unleashing his V2 rockets, and in Croydon, one of them landed. They were on the bus going to work and two of them were killed. And the people of Derry were very angry, and the trade union movement and that, because they reckoned the men had been sent over to their deaths. They didn't want to go. Who wanted to go over there at that time? So as you can see, it's more history. Nobody would associate Hitler's V2 rockets just here in our city cemetery. So such a sad story. Now, it was because of censorship that they weren't allowed to say they were killed by a rocket and where they were killed, so it just say censorship meant killed by enemy action. And then it would just say 6 county people, you know, everything was censored. So we're back in history even further back now. We're back to the conflict at the start of the 1912, 1914. It looked like we were going to have a civil war. You had the Ulster Volunteer Force from the Unionists to fight against Home Rule, and we had the Irish Volunteers formed against Home Rule. Now people say to me, Commander Mcguinness, Irish National Volunteers, what's the difference? Irish National Volunteers, Irish Volunteers. It's simply this, that the Irish Volunteers and the Ulster Volunteers, it looked like there was going to be a civil war. And both were armed and training. Civil war about Home Rule for Ireland. And then the First World War broke out. The Ulster Volunteers immediately volunteered their services for their king and country in the great fight against the Germans. And they went on the Ulster Division. Now the Irish Volunteers weren't as enthusiastic about going to fight for the British, so they held back. But then in October 1914, John Redmond, the leader of the Irish Volunteers, declared that it probably would be a good thing for the Irish Volunteers to go and fight just like the Ulster Volunteers, and to fight for the rights of small nations, to fight for poor Catholic Belgium, and also to have a good well-trained army to come back just like the Ulster Volunteers. So the movement split. A very small minority, along led by Patrick Pearson Emmons, remained behind, and they staged the Easter Rising. The vast majority became the Irish National Volunteers, like Mcguinness, very strong here in Derry, and hundreds of them went to the First World War. And so when history was written, then it sort of the volunteers that remained and fought the British and Easter Rising, sort of, they got the heroes of Irish history. One of the men that went away to fight in the war was called James Keenan. James Keenan was a great soldier. He turned out to be a good soldier in the trenches. And when he came back in Ireland, was been partitioned. He was very active on the bog side and the Brandywell. Whenever we had a mini Kosovo here, conflict between the Unionists and Nationalists down here, 40 people killed in one summer. James Keenan, very active. An unusual story about James Keenan, that is that in the 1920s, after Ireland was partitioned, James Keenan was arrested along with a man called Cullen, another World War I veteran, and charged with the murder of Howard McKay, who was shot dead in 1920. Just at the bottom of this hill, Howard McKay was a Unionist. His family were all involved, the apprentice boys. And they were charged and they were to be held a trial. Their trial was to be held in Bishop Street Court in the 1920s. And it would be a Unionist judge and a Unionist jury. And they would have got hung if they had a good thing. So the Irish people, the Irish nationalist people here in the city, mobilised in their defence, and there was huge crowds up in that at the trial. It seems the trial was lost or won on the fact that a Protestant policeman and a Protestant fireman both swore under oath that they had saw James Keenan involved in conflict over in William Street when Howard McKay was killed. So they saying, even though he was an Irish Republican involved in all sorts of things, they didn't kill Howard McKay. They were released. And then they thought that was ended, but they were arrested again later and retried. And the twist of this trial was it was going to be held in Portadown. So they were thinking Portadown, more Unionists, more likely to get convicted. Nationalist people mobilised again, went up to Portadown. Special trains were laid on. And lo and behold, the Protestant policeman, the Protestant fireman, it seems, swore on oath again that they had seen, and even though they didn't like his politics, they didn't like the man in general, he did not kill Howard McKay, and they were released. And James Keenan would eventually die during World War II, being held as an internee with his 2 sons in Crumlin Road Jail. One of whom was Sean Keenan, who now has the monument down at Free Derry Corner. So we're heavily involved in the Irish Republican movement for generations. So here we have a situation that I found very bizarre, because all my life coming over here with these row of military graves here, and there's a huge gap, well known to people from the city, and then you have another huge row. And I thought the gap in between was for the next conflict or war, and maybe they would use that. After research, what we've seen is this row here is the Catholics. So the Catholic war dead in World War II had to be kept separate and buried separate from the Protestant war dead. And it seems through research that both churches were at fault, because one, the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches were saying that their people should be going under their consecrated land, and that. This man's one of the men that went off, was a member of the Irish Volunteers and went off to fight in the First World War. It's hugely significant that they enlisted in St Colum's Hall. They enlisted under the Irish Brigade, and they stayed like a PALS battalion from the Bogside. This man here was James Downey, a young man, trained down in Kilworth. He was married with a young child, and as far as he was concerned, and his family and his history shows, he went off to fight for the rights of small nations and they fight for Ireland. And he was injured in the north of France, transported back home to Guildford in Surrey, the hospital, and then the exchange of letters from the nursing staff say he's going to be fine. Small operation, but it takes difficulties in the operation, he dies. And the last telegram the family have is saying, will we bury him over in Guildford or send the body home? So his body was sent home, and he's buried here. He was from Fulton Place in the Bogside. He joined up in St Colum's Hall, Irish Volunteer, etc., etc. And I would say now that he had as much right to be called an Irish patriot as anybody for the motives that he went off to fight. And so it's not just simple as walking past a stone and saying the man must have joined the British Army in 1914 or whatever. There's a lot more to it. So here was the resting place of a man called Johnny Fox, Ogla and Iron, IRB, Irish Republican Brotherhood. Johnny Fox, to give you an idea of how involved Johnny Fox was, in 1915 at the graveside of O'Donovan Rossa, when Patrick Pearse is reading out his famous speech, the fools, they have left us our Fenian dead. In that picture, Major McBride's at that shoulder and Johnny Fox is at the other. He was in the inner circle of the IRB that organised the Easter Rising, Johnny Fox. Here with the Gallagher family, one of them was killed in the riots in Derry in 1920, and also Hugh was shot by the Free State Army after partition and the Civil War at Drumboe. And if we move here, we have Oglach. Hugh Morrison died an active service as a result of an accident down at Skeg. So this would be the original Irish Republican plot in the cemetery, where the old Republicans would have met at Easter. They make statements and that. A lot of the young people, when I am telling them about this, the young people from schools and youth groups are saying to me, you told us the same story up there. IRA, UVF, shooting, killings, bombings, British soldiers, etc., etc. And they find it hard to believe that it all happened before. In the history of the Irish trade union movement, there's three men that stick out as being most prominent. You've got James Connolly, you've got James Lurkin, and then you had James Mccarron. James Mccarron's largely forgotten, but Alderman James Mccarron here was from Derry. He was the president of the Irish trade union movement twice. He was hugely significant in all the major battles between the trade union movement and employers. And that. He went to prison twice with hard labour, protesting about the working conditions of the shirt factory workers in Derry and others, and that was hard labour. And at the end of the First World War, in October, it ended in November, he was on his way in the RMS Leinster out of Dunleary, on his way to England to negotiate new wage rates and conditions for the workers in Derry and the shirt factories. The Germans torpedoed it. It was only weeks before the end of the war. He was drowned, along with $600. Well, anyway, he was lucky his body was recovered, and the Unionist mayor of the city at the time immediately opened a fund for the family, and there was so much raised by all the people, all different sections of society, Protestant, Catholics, that they were going to erect a monument, an actual statue of him in Guildhall Square. Didn't work out, so they erected this 12.5 foot granite a Celtic cross on his memory. And it'll tell you here it's erected by the citizens of the city. All citizens, orange, green, whatever, rich, poor. And it's largely been forgotten here, but in recent years now there's been a blue plaque erected at his home in Stanley's Walk, where he was born and loved. And there's been commemorations here now with his family from America. But he's a hugely influential character in the whole history of the city, but largely forgotten. Coming over here all my life, me and my friends on our way to the Brandywell soccer stadium, or on our way to fish down in the river, we always used this bit of land here for having races and roly-polies. It's only upon research in recent years we've discovered that this is the largest Catholic paupers plot. There could be upwards of 8,000 burials here, and if you look at the ground you can see the shapes where the coffins went in. Now, an older cemetery worker was telling that their grandfather used to help with grave diggers here, and most of the people buried came from the workhouse or the lunatic asylum, which is all are generally poor people. And they had a reusable coffin, which is still can be seen at the Tower Museum. And the old man had passed on through the generations that one of the wee tricks they had here was that they kept a pile of ashes from the gas yard, and when they buried somebody, or even a couple at a time from the workhouse or lunatic asylum or whatever, they would put a layer of ash across, and that was the symbol and signal then whenever they came back to rebury somebody else. Once you reached the wee bit of ground where the black ash was there, do not dig any further. It brings tears to me all the time here, because everybody in this city has somebody belonging to them buried in here. This is the grave of Charles O'Neill. Charles O'Neill in the early 1900s became one of the richest, wealthiest people in the city, and unusually he was a Catholic. He made his money through wholesaling and that. But you can see here, he was actually a relative of Owen Roe O'Neill, the great Irish warrior. So it seems he built a mansion out where we would call now, out where Connors Court is, where the fire station on Northern Road is. And an old lady on one of my tours recently told me a story, and she said that the mansion that he built out there, Ardowan, which then became the Ardowan Hotel, was called Ardowan after Owen Roe O'Neill, so in tribute to the great Irish warrior. Ironically, it was bombed by the Provisional IRA Republicans, this great thing, hotel, Ardowan Hotel. Anyway, but the story she was telling was very funny. I don't know if it's true, but she says her grandmother was his housekeeper. She said that Charles O'Neill went up to purchase a house in Crawford Square. He established himself as one of the dignitaries in the city, and he was told he couldn't purchase one because he was a Catholic. So she said that what he did then was he instructed his people to buy the land in front of Crawford Square. And he bought the land in front of Crawford Square, and he told the architect to build his mansion in such a way that it would destroy the view from the houses in Crawford Square. And she said he asked them as well to put the toilet and bathroom to the rear of the mansion, so that every morning then he was able to wash his hands with the windows open going to the people up in Crawford Square. You can keep your houses. So where Connors Court is now is actually, and a lot of older people will remember, the Ardowan Hotel. So very funny story. This is Lady Waters, who made her fortune in America. When she returned home, she donated most of it to the Catholic Church, who used it then to build the Nazareth House in Bishop Street. This grave was largely covered in briars, full of vodka bottles and cans, and we wondered what was on behind all the overgrowth, and kindly the guys working here cut it all back, and we discovered that it says it's the burying ground of the O'Neills. Now, we had Charles O'Neill there, and I've studied my Irish history, and as far as I know, to be called the O'Neill, you had to be related to Hugh O'Neill, the Irish chieftain that left and went to Europe at Rathmullen, the Flight of the Earls. So We actually could have Irish royalty was lying here covered in briars, and we're still researching it, but the fact they call themselves the O'Neills is hugely important. I stopped here one day doing a tour with one of my friends, Glenn Cooley, and he took me up to see his father's grave, and his father was one of the most well-known chiropodists, cut your toes, your feet, in Derry, and his gravestone had "my last 6 feet," which was very funny for the thing. But I tell people that, you know, all our generations had humour, and here we have this lady here. It says here that for 25 years she was the midwife at the local dispensary, so she delivered the babies, and her wee inscription here now says, "Now she rests from her labours, midwife, etc." This here is a hugely symbolic section of cemetery, and you'd be amazed at how many people from the city that have been here most of their lives and they don't realise why. What this path here there is indicating is our dividing line, our peace wall, and that's the Catholic section, and this here would be the Protestant section. Once you know that, it seems then pretty obvious, because you see all the different headstones changing, Roman obelisks, and this headstone here that looks as if the top has fallen off at the column. It's not. These headstones indicate that there was a life cut short. It doesn't go up to the top like these. That's the McCrae family plot. McCrae from Mccarron College and the Ulster Unionist Party. And here's a who's who of professors from Magee. I have a suspicion that that Magee University must have had their own plot for their own lectures and that. And you can see now down here, the references to Virgin Mary and Padre Pio will stop, and R.I.P. rest in peace will now become biblical scriptures, you know, until the dawn breaks, thy day will come, etc. Down here, just a wee grave down here, is a man that used to run the Fort Knox, the American Treasury, and he was a surgeon, and he developed surgical practices that people tell me now they still use in Old McGilvin back in the day. So lots of links here to the colonies and the empires down here, and it sort of would be quite different to what we have up in the Catholic section. Here we have a man, Craig, commemorated, who died and served in the First World War. Alongside him is a man called Mitchell, who's believed to be a descendant, relative of John Mitchell, the young Irelander, and it sits here that he was in the Crimean War, in charge of the Light Brigade, Florence Nightingale. And this man here was a surgeon in the South African War, the Boer War. History in one spot, these 3 war graves here from the Boer War, etc. And you cross over here, and here's Richard Baleto, Flight Sergeant, RAF Volunteer Reserve, killed in action on the attacks on the Ruhr dams. He was one of the dam busters. Now, he's not buried here, but his family was from out the roads here, so he's commemorated here even though he's buried in Berlin. Sadly, I have to tell you that even though this here is the centrepiece of the old Victorian design cemetery with the beautiful views, it also commanded the highest price to be buried here. But it's beautiful and sad, but this here is a result of vandalism. And you could actually see the footmarks where whoever vandalised it had to rock back and forward to do this. This man was actually an ancient, was a collector of taxes at the old port, and pieces of it are missing now. Over here was also vandalism, and you can see it's right beside here Austin's, who the family Austin's of the Diamond. People are surprised to hear that Austin's is one of the oldest independent store in the world, older than Missy's, older than Harrods. And behind here you've got Brewster's from the famous bakery, and that's so you've got the commercial and industrial people of the city all here in this section. So thanks to some kind local who came over here and cut away all the overgrowth, we can now see the grave of James Mcknight. James Mcknight was from the Presbyterian community. He was the editor of the Londonderry Standard. He was a great linguist. He spoke fluent Irish Gaelic, and Trevor Temple in this project tells us that when he died, he was reciting the Our Father as Gaelic on his deathbed. You can see he was an advocate of the tenant right cause, so he was a Gaelgoer, and when people were getting evicted from their homes, he was campaigning against it. He was friends with Michael Davitt, and it just shows you the complexities of history that here you have this man here. It was a fluent Gaelgoer after the tenants' rights and that there, down here from the Protestant community and in this section. Trevor Temple and I were always wondering, the research we done over here, who would have been Derry's last World War I Tommy. And we got various people that died in their 90s, 90 years old, etc. But we found out there was a man called George Lindsay who owned substantial tracts of land out at Ballyarnett, but he had died at Carrickfergus. So we thought he was buried in Carrickfergus, but one day we discovered this, and it's George Lindsay. Died the 16th of March 1998, and he was 103 years old, and he was at the Somme, and he actually went out into the no man's land searching for his brother, we believe. So remarkably, he loved I would say would be Derry's last World War I Tommy. A lot of the young Protestant groups that come here from me, the young people, are very surprised they find James Mcknight, that was a fluent Gaelic speaker, advocate of tenants' rights. They're also very surprised they find the ornate Celtic crosses, who they associate with people supporting Celtic and that. Have to explain them about the people that came here from Scotland and the islands and that, brought their Gaelic culture with them. Down here along the fence is there's a black headstone sitting sort of on its own, and that would be Inez McCormick, the lady who was the president of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, very good friend of Hillary Clinton, very good friend of Meryl Streep. Behind her is the original house where the cemetery keeper would have lived, and the wee church. One of the concepts of these wee churches and cemetery is that people didn't want to leave getting buried beside their little church up at Long Tower or at St Colum's Cathedral. So a wee thing was to bring a church over to the cemetery. Could be used by everybody. It was designed by the same man that designed the Fergie Gate that you now see up beside Foylside. And it's a wee Victorian jewel, and we'd love to see it renovated someday in the visitor centre. This is one of our worldwide global claims to fame, as the final resting place of Frances Alexander, the wife of the Bishop of Derry and the composer of some of the greatest hymns for children, or greatest hymns indeed, and one of my favourites, All Things Bright and Beautiful. People come from all over the world to see it, and she's resting here, and one of her famous hymns said that there is a green hill far away without a city wall, and people are saying she composed the hymns up here at the city wall, and here's a green hill without the city wall, and here she has deliberately placed where she wrote the hymns and where she lived in the cathedral. Charles Love Crockett here, who holds the distinction of being the only person from Derry, the city, killed in the Easter Rising, and he wasn't one of the rebels. He was actually a lieutenant in the Enniskillen Fusiliers. It says he was killed in action 29th of April 1916. He was actually killed by friendly fire, a sentry of his own in Dublin, and so it's a link with the Easter Rising. Behind me here we have the huge cook grave, one of the substantial shipping families from Derry, and along with them and the McCorkles and that, we've reckoned now we've got a diaspora of over 19 million people due to the people left these ports. Don't let anybody tell you that coffin ships left these ports. I've researched them for years and years. The Cook family, the McCorkle family had great ships, they had great crew, you had to pay to get on the ships. There were some people died, but that was through infections and weather that sunk ships and that. But they were good Christian people, and it's unfair to say that they sent over maybe some other ports, but not from Derry. It's very dishonourable to their family to be saying that they sort of packed as many as they could to make money and sent them off to die across the Atlantic. It was great ships, copper bottom, made in Newfoundland, Canada, and very honourable people. We should respect their memory. Here we have the first vault, and that is the Von Schieffelin Knox Peck household from Crahane. Up here with the arm missing is the grave of Tillian Henderson. Tillian Henderson's factory mentioned in Get Das Capital by Karl Marx. And behind these trees we have the Foster family plot, who are regarded as being the founders of the American ragtime style music, you know, Oh Susanna and that type of music. The Gilmore was a great shipping agent, very kind to the Catholic community at the time of the famine and cholera outbreaks. Down here we would have Basil Mcfarlane, lots of mayors of Derry and that, all fishing the city. So this is a vault of a surgeon in Derry, doctor called Dr. Bernard. Now Dr. Bernard probably doesn't get the credit he deserves. And why we should be thankful for them amongst many is that Dr. Bernard used his wealth and had the vision to recreate the Greenland fort that we all enjoy out there today. So if you read the sign out there, it'll say it was thanks to the wealth and foresight of Dr. Bernard. Now someone on the tour has suggested to me that this Dr. Bernard, the surgeon and doctor in the city, is a descendant related to Dr. Bernard, who carried out the first heart transplant in South Africa. So we're still investigating that. This is the Stevenson family grave, and it's commemorating one of the family, Enniskillen Fusiliers, who died the first day at the Battle of Somme. It had a huge impact here in the city. Over 120 people associated with the city died that day, over 100 of them from the local unionist population. And remember, Derry's population at that time was only about 10,000, between 10 and 40,000, 10,000 adults maybe, so it was a huge loss. And as you can see here, they called the 1st of July, because it was so significant, the local units, they called it the Ulster Charge. So the charge of the Ulster Brigade, the Ulster Division at the Somme, was known locally for quite a while as being the Ulster Charge. He died in the Ulster Charge. So here we would have the plot for the Eaton family from Eaton's Bakery, and the sad story of Colonel Oliver Eaton, who was killed by the IRA in 1976. He was 42 years old. So we've got members of the IRA up here buried, with people that the IRA were responsible for killing here, just yards away. I recently visited Auschwitz, the concentration camps, and it really affected me about man's inhumanity to man and that. And when I came back, I was asking, apart from the men that had fought the Nazis and that, there's a lot on here, was there any other stories? And somebody has told me, I can't verify it, that this Auschwitz and Silzagi graves here were a Jewish family in Austria, as you can see here, was born in Vienna, and they said that they, just like the Sound of Music, you know the film, the musical Sound of Music, they're saying just like that they managed to get a skip from Austria, away from the Nazis, and they got here. And somebody says they came here because there was a small Jewish community in Derry, with a synagogue in the fountain, and that was the only people they knew. They told me then that they were promptly interned when war broke out because they were regarded as German-speaking aliens. They then said that the lady married one of the RAF pilots who were based beside her internment camp at McGilligan. Such a threat she was distant, and even though she died in Dublin in 1985, requested to be brought here to be buried. So just facing them is the graves of the Protestant World War II men that died here, mostly naval because of our port. And there's a great story over here about the Queen Mary and the Curacao. I think we're proud here in Derry that no matter how difficult political situations got, nobody has ever vandalised the war graves, which is good. But people ask me, why are the graves so similar? And the story is that after the First World War, Fabian Ware was delegated with the task of the reburial of the millions of service people. And it states in his book that he had no sooner been appointed to the post than he started receiving cheques and cash from lady and lord this and that, wanting 20-foot high marble crosses for their sons and that. And he started thinking to himself, well, what about the orphans and the poor people from the mining villages and all? So he decreed that they all should get the same. The major difference being if you were a Christian, you got the cross, Star of David for Jewish people, etc, etc. Plus the only allowance then was if you paid extra money, you were allowed to get inscribed words at the bottom. Thus, some of them have words at the bottom and some of them don't. Seems here like they're still on parade. Well, anyway, we're here at the Curacao because there's a story behind this, and the story is thus. when the Americans entered the war after Pearl Harbor, there was a huge meeting in America with the defence chiefs and the president, and what it was about was we're now at war with the Germans in Europe, but how are we going to get our guys over there? The only way to get them across is the Atlantic, and the U-boats are sinking ships. So if the U-boats were to start sinking ships with our guys on it straight away, it would be a huge propaganda coup to the Nazis. Plus, we could be out of this war as quick as we were on it if they're going to be telling all these people your sons were killed before they even reached Europe. So what they came up with was that there was a ship called the Queen Mary, a very fast liner, and it was that fast that it couldn't be sunk with the U-boats. I think now it's actually a hotel in California. So they decided to get the Queen Mary, convert it to a troop ship, and it was to sail from New York with 10,000 American service people on it. And the captain, before he left New York, was handed a sealed envelope with orders, special orders, and that was, do not stop this ship until you safely reach port. That means that if he had seen the Titanic in distress, he had to sail on. His job was to get to Liverpool with them 10,000 sailors. The story goes it was an uneventful journey. You can watch it all on YouTube, type in Curacao, Queen Mary. Uneventful journey, but when it reached here out off the coast of Ireland, at Tory Island and Moor and that, it had to slow down to proceed to Liverpool. Then it was in danger, so they sent out the Curacao and another ship to escort it. And the story is that the Curacao came out off Tory Island zigzagging. The Queen Mary was zigzagging, and one thought the other was going to zigzag that way and I'll zigzag way, and it didn't. The Queen Mary cut the Curacao in half, and 340 sailors plunged into the icy waters, and the Queen Mary just proceeded on his journey as per instructions of the captain. But the other ship was able to pick up some survivors and bodies, and 120 of the Curaçao's souls that died were washed up on a small Scottish island. 5 of them were brought on here for burial. It was kept a big secret. 4 of them are here because they're Protestants in the Protestant section. 1 of them's buried up in the Catholic section, buried apart, even though they served together. And it was kept a big secret until after the war. And sad to relate that after the war, when the inquiry was held about the accident, it wasn't even about the people that were killed in it. It seems it was more to do with who was going to pay the compensation. The Ministry of the Admiralty, or the owners of the British Ministry of Defence, the Admiralty, or the Queen Mary's owners, etc., etc. So it was more to do with money rather than the human loss of life. I'm sure most of you watching this were like myself, that you've often walked here from you were no age, and you've often wondered why this gap was here and why this gap was here. I wonder too. It's only recently we've discovered that the reason for it is that during World War II, 2 free Norwegian sailors died here. Not military related, it was accidental deaths, illness, and they were buried here. But then after the war, their families in Norway and the Norwegian government asked would it be possible for them to be taken back home to be buried with their family in Norway. So the 2 sailors were taken back. So these gaps are indicative of where the Norwegian sailors were buried. This is both of a sample of what's here. History on your doorstep. Often the most interesting things are on your doorstep, and they largely go unnoticed. Now, this was a trip here on behalf of friends at Derry City Cemetery. We're still continuing the research. I'm telling you, if you want to get out in the fresh air, you want a good walk, you want to learn your history, your heritage, I mean, this is the place to go. And glad to say we've helped stop the vandalism. I hope you can all play your part too, be keeping an eye on it. And if you have any further research questions, you can get back to us. And I'd like to thank the funders and that for inviting us to take part in this project.